that is acting as our center. So I'd like to ask Gally to remove the spotlights and go to gallery view. So for you on your computers, if you go to the top right-hand corner of your screen and switch from speaker to gallery, if you had it on speaker, so you can see everybody all together. Now, if you have the most recent updated version of Zoom, you will be able to try this as a potential tool. So I'll invite you to find that Drawing Jamie screen, that video screen, click on it in the middle and drag it over to what is about the center for you. And pretend like, imagine that we were all together in person in a circle. And this is our center of our circle today, okay? So when we are in circle space, it's kind of like stepping over a threshold. We've entered a different world together. We are able to shape a world together in the words that we bring forward, in our ways of being together. And that's a really powerful thing. So I want to invite you today to speak with intention, be willing to give and to receive, and maybe start considering your work and why you're here today. And I'll offer up a question for you to think about, and I would like to hear from a few folks on the call today. When you think about this work that we're doing, I think as artists or people working in the creative sector, we have this deep voice inside of us that compels us into this work. And we all have different reasons for why that is. We all have different dreams for what we would like our communities to be. And I would like to hear from you for this check-in in a phrase or in one breath. When you think about this work that you're here doing, what is that one thing or one of the things that compels you into this work? I want to offer up that you can unmute yourself if someone would like to contribute into the circle. What is that thing that's driving you in this work? What compels you? In a phrase, in a breath? Who would like to offer something? Matt, the arts have value. Thank you for that. Is there a brave person willing to unmute and offer up some words? Bring your voice into the circle.
Jump in, helping others to find joy in creative practice.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. Sally Ann said building community. That's great. How about one more?
It looks like Jamie's
Jamie, you're muted. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Sorry. Thank you all. I was gonna say mine is largely selfish. It's to support my own need for relief through my creativity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, so if we had a longer time together, we would bring everybody's voice into the circle. I'd like to invite you, if you have a thought that came up, to please add that to the chat. We'll be doing a harvest of what comes out of this. And please feel free to keep adding things to the chat, add questions, add comments as we move forward. So now that we kind of paused for a minute, we're gonna speed up and we're gonna get into some fast work together. So today, here's what we're about to jump into. It's gonna be a workshop in a workshop. Okay, what in the heck does that mean? Well, we are going to step into a salad bar of sorts, thinking about tools and conversations that we can have today. So one of the things that you identified to the resource team was that you're interested in learning more about outreach. What does that look like? Or within rural communities, what does that look like? And you're thinking about what are some tools that we can use for better access, breaking some digital divides, and what are maybe some new tools that we can use when we're working in a virtual space. So this is going to be like we're walking through the salad bar. You're going to get a taste of things today. Maybe you're thinking, okay, I want to try a little bit of the shrimp over here. This sounds pretty good for what I'm doing in my work. Or maybe you're the kind of person where you think, okay, this lettuce sounds pretty good. I'm going to try some of that. This will be an opportunity for you to kind of pick and choose what tools you think might work well for you in the work that you're doing. So there's no one right answer. There's no cookie cutter model. I know Lynn has mentioned this before. Of course, our communities aren't homogenous. So you can pick and choose what's right for you today and have the opportunity to offer up some things that you found that work well too. Because ultimately, I don't have all the answers, but I like to think of this as a time where we can give each other some gifts and put to good use the wisdom that's in the room right now and offer up some collective wisdom that we can all share. So maybe you have an idea that you'd like to contribute about a tool that's worked well for you, or you have a question, or whatever you contribute in, we're also going to take a big harvest of all of this work that we do together so that we end up with a great big list of ideas and resources that you can use in your work. Okay, so with that, we are going to switch over to trying a different tool. You're seeing one example here, which is if you like going analog, it's very easy to just set up. In this case, I have an iPad that's set up and being used as a document camera right now. You could do it with your phone too. Get out some books. I made a stand for mine, but this can work really well if you want to use pen and paper and kind of continue in that way. I'm going to ask that Gally switch us over to a different tool for you to see, which is called Mural. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. I like using Mural in part because it can work well if you're trying to move people through a sequence. It's very good for planning out kind of longer periods of time together. So you're going to get a little taste of this while we talk about one of your conversation topics. All right, so the first one, let's dive in a little bit to breaking barriers to our virtual participation, because that is definitely a need. So Gally, I'll ask that you go to the next frame. So let's think about broadband access, okay? And one of the things that I think, especially in rural, when you think about broadband access, is you're gonna have different scenarios wherever you're going. I'll offer up a few ideas, but I'd like to hear a few of yours too, if you found that things work. It's not necessarily just rural that might have broadband access issues, and you might be surprised at where some communities have very good broadband. So let's think about this from kind of the overarching broad perspective. First, getting creative. I think oftentimes you might want to consider what are some of the different ways that haven't been explored about bringing people access. So let's talk about your budget. Do you have funding that's available to provide a hotspot, perhaps, for some of your participants? What could that look like? Something temporary. Is it that you could pair with a place in the community that's already using internet and providing it to the community and boost that signal out to make it more available to people? Could it be a local library? Could it be the community center? What options are available there that you could already tap into that make that access more readily available if you're doing something virtually? So think about how to boost that signal maybe. There can be cheaper options as you think about what's needed. Additionally, could you tap into a community's access channel? Is there a way to be able to broadcast live and work with the community so that people who maybe can't make it in person could be watching right from their homes? And maybe they could be calling in on Zoom using the phone link or the phone number. What could that look like? Oftentimes communities have an access channel and might be willing to work with you on broadcasting that, because they're looking for content. As I'm writing these, I'll invite anybody to add to the chat any ideas that they've seen work or anything that's a little bit out of the box on trying to get better access around internet and participation. Awesome, thank you, Megan. With Tech Soup idea, I love that. We're gonna add that in. Keep them coming. And what about, is there a way that you could host a drive-in where this is very applicable for during COVID times, but it could be applicable for different reasons such as accessibility. Maybe it's easier for someone to drive into an event and stay in their car. What if you were able to broadcast what you were doing onto a projector screen and you had an FM transmitter and were able to make that signal so that people could tune in with their car radios to participate? What would that look like? So it's thinking about, rather than, if you can't bring broadband to everybody's home, could you be able to make one spot where people can still gather safely and participate? All right, micro FM, awesome. Matt, can you unmute for a second and just say a little bit about what that is?
Sure. I haven't had too much opportunity to use it, but I've known artists over several years who have been able to use, I mean, I was imagining it in a form similar to what you were just describing, that there's a very limited broadcast. It doesn't go very far, and so it tends to be fairly inexpensive in terms of the equipment. There's not a lot of regulation keeping you from using it well, but you can communicate in a way that kind of, even though it's accessible technology because everybody has an FM receiver somehow, it also is, it's inexpensive, and somehow the smallness and needing to be within a certain geographic space makes it feel potentially kind of intimate, which I think is nice. And Perfect. It can have kind of a community gathering thing like you were describing.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. So Matt might be a good resource as well if you're trying to figure out, might that be a way that I could use that in my project? I'll throw out one other thing, which is really to think about this question. What's the underlying barrier to access? So the solutions that you're looking for might be simpler than you think. If you're asking that question, what's the real problem? What's the underlying issue here? And then what assets do I have that I might be able to pair to break those barriers? So we're going to come back around to all of these things. Keep those ideas coming in the chat. You're going to have a chance to talk more about them too. We're going to move on to the next piece, which is about accessibility. So Gally, if you could go to that next frame, please. Thank you. Okay. So when you think about accessibility in general, here's some things to keep in mind. So anybody remember what was the very first thing that I opened with today? Do you remember the very first thing that I said? Feel free to unmute. Anybody? Or put in the chat? You weren't expecting a quiz, were you? It's okay. Okay, the very first thing that I opened with was, hey, closed captioning is available for you if you want to use it. I recommend bringing that up from the beginning. If you have it, we'll talk about that in a second. Because if somebody is having difficulty connecting and understanding what's going on, if you mention that from the top, it can keep them staying in line with the group as you move forward. So nobody's left behind. So closed captioning options. Consider there's the ability to hire somebody to be a live closed captioner. We have Brooke today. Thank you for your work. And also if you're looking for maybe trying some AI, I've tried one that I use quite often called Rev Live. I'll put it into the board here, and then you'll have that also listed for accessibility within our harvest as well. Rev Live is something that offers a free, at least for right now, in March 2021. They had a free 7-day trial, and then after that, $20 a month. It works pretty accurately. It's worth checking out, though, to really consider what are some of the things I can keep doing to help break down barriers. Awesome. I see a bunch of other chats too. I want to ask for Margie or Lynn to just flag anything if I'm missing something along the way, and feel free to interrupt me. So in addition to closed captioning, think about any language barriers that you might be having with potential participants coming in. Is this in English and you have non-English speakers? If so, what needs to be done to help break those barriers? Are you trying to do more outreach that involve different languages? Think about that live interpretation. Another option that I've tried that I use pretty often is called Microsoft Translator. I'd love to hear in the chat if anybody else has tried some different options that have worked well for you. It's the kind of thing where you definitely want to test it out and make sure that it's working for the communities or the groups of people that you're stepping in to be working with before you do it. And Meryl, if you'd like to type more in the chat about your experiences working with translators, that'd be awesome. So we can get a sense of what that was like or what that process was like. Here's another one for you. So I have this sticky note labeled text, and then it has a little number 1 up in the corner. One thing that can be quite a barrier is around the colors that you're picking when you are doing something maybe like this. You've got a sticky wall or just the general aesthetic that you're using. Sometimes if people are experiencing, if they have color blindness, it can be very hard for them to decipher between 2 colors that might look very different to you. I will share with you a resource later about how you can think about that as far as mapping out color schemes. But in addition to that, one thing I really recommend doing is not only using color to differentiate, but some other way, whether that's a symbol or using numbers, so that if you are pointing to something and you say, go to that green sticky note, not your whole audience might not understand. They might not see it the way you are. So to be able to reference, okay, let's move to the sticky note that has a number 1 in the top left corner, the green one, then you're providing different ways for people to access that content. So keep that into consideration. Would love it to hear too, if anybody has any tips on or resources for thinking about color when it comes to color blindness. And anything else? I'm seeing compensation for participation. Love that.
There are also, Jamie, quite a few good tips on translation services.
Oh, okay, great.
As well.
And we're saving this chat, Lynn, right?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a document that I'll be putting all of these things into. Awesome, awesome, everybody. Okay, so Gally, I'll ask you to move to the next slide. Okay, so think about, this was one of the questions you asked about, what if people have differing levels of technical experience and expertise? Here are some things to think about really quickly. Is there training that you could or that you need to do in advance with the people that you're inviting in? Sometimes that can be the best thing to do before you host anything. Additionally, it can just be really helpful to start 15 minutes early, to open up Zoom, if you're using Zoom or whatever platform, and then offer that technical assistance. So anybody who's having trouble has the opportunity to get on board before everybody else starts. That in itself can make all the difference. And then the other thing I'll say is, if you're hosting something online, it makes such a huge difference to have roles where you can focus on facilitating, and maybe somebody else can do note-taking, somebody else can do timekeeping if you need it, and to have somebody in that tech role. So today, Gally is playing that role of tech, which is great. So I don't have to focus on trying to jump around from thing to thing. That in itself will revolutionize your meeting experience. Okay, so that was really fast. We're moving forward. and we're going to jump into conversation together. So in just a second, we're going to move into some breakout rooms where you will get a chance to talk both about what are some of the tech tools that are your favorites, as well as what are some of the questions that you still have around tech or trying to break down some of those barriers. And then also, how have you already been creating more digital access for your project participants? So what has that looked like for you? I'll ask that if there are resource team members in the room, if you wouldn't mind taking notes, there's going to be a Google document that we're all working in, we all have access to, and Gally will have that in the chat for us too. This Google document will be our repository for part of our big harvest. So please feel free to share as much as you're willing and would like to, because when we do that, then we all benefit.
And one quick, I'm going to jump in just for a sec, Jamie. It doesn't look like we have a lot of resource team members on this particular session. So I think you're going to have to choose someone in your group if you need to take notes. Most groups probably won't have a resource team member.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, if anybody would be willing in your group, you can decide or choose a couple of you, or it could be a free-for-all. You can all go at it in the Google document. So I will be kind of jumping in and out to a few different breakout rooms throughout this to just kind of hear what you're saying, and then we'll come back in and do a quick share out of some of the best things that we heard. Sound good, everybody? Give me a thumbs up, or you can indicate in your reactions at the bottom. Awesome. Okay, so Gally, whenever you are ready to send us over. Awesome, okay. I think that's everybody. Gally, I'm going to give them a couple minutes before I hop in there.
Sounds good.
1, 2, 3, ready? Awesome. Okay, well, hey, let's do a quick share out and hear some things that you came up with. There's some awesome things in that document right now. Could somebody offer up one really cool tip that they heard about using a digital tool that they hadn't heard about before? Don't be shy. Go ahead and unmute. Whoever would like to start.
I'll share one. I was walking the other day in my neighborhood and saw a placard tacked to a phone pole with a QR code, and it said, "This neighborhood was redlined." And I was like, that's intriguing, and figured out I'd never done it before. I'm so embarrassed how to do the QR code thing, and then saw that it was an invitation to a Zoom community conversation about histories of urbanism where I live. I thought that was so rad. It's really cool.
That is awesome. Thank you, Catherine. What else? One other tool. One you want to recommend?
Jamie, can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
Sorry, not Jamie, Karina. You talked about something in response to Jamie Drew's question about kind of digital literacy and how do you sort of reach across that digital divide, even for folks that might have challenges with literacy or other ways to like creatively engage them.
Yes, I've been a part of group discussions where we've used design software to come up with icons or images. So we were talking about favorite activities in one, and a facilitator was screen sharing, and they were screen sharing a Canva document that was being created. Canva is a design software, and it allows you to add like squares and circles and lines, but you can also search for like basketball. So someone's favorite activity was basketball. So they searched for a picture of a basketball and brought it onto the page, and then that icon was a part of the conversation.
Very cool. Yeah, so if you felt like these conversations were too short, I saw that in the chat, maybe that's what that refers to. Surprise, you will be able to go back into the breakout session with your same group and have an extended conversation as we move into the next thing. Karina, thank you for sharing that too. And I see another comment from Sally Ann about drive-ins, but thinking about it in a different way. Thank you for that also. Let's keep expanding our ideas, right? Because there's no one right model. So you have to think about how these tools or these outreach activities will work for your particular project and your community. Okay, another surprise. It's time, since we're partway through our session, to do a quick stretch. So if you're seated and you want to stretch, go ahead. If you'd like to stand up and you want to stretch, go for it. You can walk around a little bit, wave to your neighbor as you walk past the video screen. But let's get that blood flowing again, right? Awesome. And in the meantime, we are going to do a little bit of a meta conversation here and lift the curtain, so to speak. So I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you one of the ways that I get prepared for doing something like this, which is to create an agenda. And probably you are doing this, something like this too, perhaps. If not, here's a way to think about it. So whenever I am preparing to go into community, I put together something like this. This is kind of the general format that I use. It might change if I'm working with a different collaborator, so that we both are on the same page about how we like to work together. But, you know, kind of lifting this up a little bit, here's what the agenda looks like. And I have roles. So there are particular roles that you'll see Gally is doing the spotlight here. I might share what I'd like for the Zoom view, and we'll work together on that, or what visuals are going to be shown. Also, tip, I have found this to be extremely helpful, because if you're hosting a day-long thing, you might have tons of pages. So to put what section it's in can help you from losing track of where you're at. You may or may not be planning out something that is so scripted necessarily. I don't necessarily always stick to what's being said here, but it's just a prompt to help me know what I might bring up in the time. And I will say that for doing work where I'm out in community, I usually create something like that, and that the planning that I think about for that is to take at least, at very minimum, twice as long a time preparing for the event as the time duration that the event actually is. So maybe some of you also think that. Jamie, I saw, did you have a question or a comment about that?
No, I'm sorry. There's stuff going on in my background. I was waving to somebody like, can't talk.
Oh, no worries. Great. Yeah, so also Gally does something similar. So Gally, I'd love to invite you to share your screen and just tell us a little bit about your process.
Sure. So hi, everyone. It's me. So on my end, I have a breakdown moment by moment, section by section for each of the sessions during this conference, during the Learning Lab. And we call this our run of show. So those of you who are involved in theater might have seen something similar for a show with all of the cues and all of the sounds that happen at different points. And this is really helpful for anyone who's running the technical side of your meetings to have everything that they need to be watching out for and doing on the technical side of Zoom. And it's also helpful. So the company that I'm working with, Looking Glass Creative, does help out with the presenters to kind of figure out what is the best way to accommodate what they want to do in terms of breakout rooms, or what kind of tech support they'll need in their session, and having this document to collaborate on and to use the information that the presenters give us in their agenda or with their presentations, and compiling it all into here so it's streamlined just for the technical side of it. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to share, Jamie.
No, thank you so much. That's perfect. So it just gives you a little bit of a sense of kind of what that looks like when you lift the curtain. I appreciate you sharing that, Gally. So also, I want to ask Margie, because there was something that she had that was a pretty cool tech tool. And I wonder if we could just quickly show that example so people can see what that looks like, if you'd be willing to share your screen really quick.
Yes. So the way that I do this is I share my screen. That's that green button on the bottom. And then I go up to where it says next to basic, it says advanced. And I use the block that says slides as virtual background. So I click on that. And then I click share. And it pulls up my drive. And I choose the PowerPoint that I want to share. It's loading. And now I can share my slideshow with you while I can be seen, and I can point to it if I need to and such.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Margie. Appreciate that. And so if you have any questions about that, please circle back with Margie on that. Also, I had heard that Scott Oshima on our team also has a pretty fabulous way of using that tool. So you might want to reach out to them too and ask about some different ways that you can try presenting. Keep it engaging for people, right? So thank you, Margie. Now, Gally, I'd like to ask if you could switch over to spotlighting the Drawing Jamie video. We're going to talk about outreach, because that was the other area that you wanted to kind of think about today. So I'll say that one of the things when I'm out in community, I hear a lot of around events and outreach is this question. This is something that comes up a lot. I might hear the organizer saying or lamenting that people didn't show up, or the people they thought they wanted to show up didn't show up. And so the question becomes, why don't they show up? And in some regards, it's almost kind of placing that fault on the participants that they didn't show up. And I'd like to encourage you that if you hear that coming up, if someone is saying that, to take this as a signal that this is time to get curious and to shift that thinking for people just a little bit, to change the question to a curious one about how might I or how might we become more welcoming, and really think about what are the things we have to do to break down barriers? What are the barriers that we might not be thinking about that are keeping people from participating? Because when you step into this space of curiosity, then you can open up a whole new world, okay? So keep that in mind. I'd love to hear in the chat if there's other things that you're hearing in community that you get kind of wondering, what's the next step? Where do we go from here? And in the meantime, I want to share with you a model that might be helpful as you think about working on your projects. This is a model that can kind of be morphed to whatever kind of question you're asking, but essentially it's kind of thinking about a spectrum with something on one side and something on the other and asking a question around it. So we're going to think about it in terms of your creative project work. On one side, you have you or whoever's leading the project, your team, whoever that might be. And on the other side, you have the community. So we're talking about community engagement here. And I want you to think about when you go through different phases of your project. So let's say you're talking about ideation. And you think about, let's say the question is around who has ownership over this, or who has decision-making power over this. Consider that. Where do you fall on the spectrum? Is it right here? Mark it down. Where are you at? Because that's going to inform how you go about this process together, right? Okay, keep moving through this. What about for the design of your project? After you've gone through ideation, where do you fall, right? Mark that down. Same thing, think about implementation. And participation, right? And after that, then think about, you might be doing some evaluation. Also, a really important one I want to bring up here is validation. As you think about your work in community, who is this for? Who is saying that this is meaningful? And if you end up answering more over on this side, then I think that tells you a couple things. That you really need to be working on your community outreach in all of these aspects. And this has to happen before the ideation point, or it should be, or think about that for your next project, your project to come. What do you need to do in order to make these things true when they work through your project? And it also means that if you're answering more over on this end towards community, that the community has to be involved in the conversations here, the meta level about ownership and decision-making, talking through this very model together so that everybody's on the same page. So I hope that that can be a helpful model as you kind of work through any future projects or even as you're closing up a project. Okay, now let's talk about strategies. So strategies for outreach. I'm going to say again, there's no one right way to do this because every community is different. So you have to think about what's right for your community. But let's start with a few of them. So first of all, make sure that you plan in enough time for what you're going to do. Outreach always takes more time than you think it's going to. So build that into your project from the very beginning. Similarly, the personal invitation, I know definitely in my community and rural communities that I work in the Midwest, that personal invite is so important. Letting them know who's going to be at the table or who you intend to be at the table. Maybe asking them a few times, keep sharing that information over and over. Of course, respect people's no's if that comes up, right? But if they're hesitant, they just don't know what it's about, ask some questions, learn what barriers there might be on that end and make them feel welcome. Learn what that means. Another big one is to respect the calendar of the community that you're trying to host an event in. Are there event dates that are already off the table because they have something that's already planned? Make sure you are mindful of that so you're not overlapping. This one, I bet you do this one, you offer childcare. Make sure that any of those barriers that might inhibit somebody from participating are taken care of. Bring food, right? People are always going to come in when there's food. Use their info hub. What this means is, where does the community usually share their information together? In my community, one of those places happens to be a bulletin board at the post office. How can you tap into the ways that they're already sharing their information so that you're working with the flow that already works according to them? So think about what that is. Maybe it's a barrel in the middle of Main Street. I've seen that done too. So get curious about what that looks like. Could be coffee hour too at the local gas station. Who knows? And last but not least, I think this is probably the most important one. Your outreach work is going to be most successful when you are taking time to build relationships. So that means, what are you doing today that will make things better 5 years from now? So whenever you're doing some project in the future and thinking back to this, if you're trying to work towards here, if that's your goal, what are you doing today that in 5-10 years from now, that broader picture, you have this involvement set up? Okay. So one other thing I'll mention is in creating some questions to ask around doing your strategies. So let the good questions guide you. It's kind of like planting seeds or planting bulbs. If you get the right question for your community, for this place and this time, it's going to allow something emergent to happen. So stay curious. There are some questions that I would like to show you as an example. Gally, I don't know if you have that second Google document, I wonder if you could share the questions section, and I'll just briefly show people a few of those questions to think about as you work into your breakout rooms, or I can just say them too, that's fine. So thinking about, yeah, perfect. I'll just name a couple of these. Think about your work. What would it look like to do this work equitably? What happens if you allow that to guide the way that you're setting up a project? It might change how your project turns out. Or what space or spaces might be neutral spaces to meet for all participants? What does it mean for your participants to have a neutral space? Is there a neutral space? If there's not, again, what will you do to try to minimize those barriers or to create a more welcoming environment? So the questions that are on this page are things that you'll be able to talk through and also add in your own. Let me just re-emphasize that these questions might not be the one right question for you, but they're an offering that you can take and reword to what you need for your community, your project. So as we go into breakout rooms again with your groups that you were in before, we'll ask for you to consider what are some of the creative strategies that you've tried that's worked well already. Put them in the list. Let's hear about them so that we can get better in our own outreach work. And then additionally, what are some of those questions that really could help guide our outreach strategies? Let's get curious together and let's offer up some really good questions so that we can do better when we're out trying to do that outreach. Help us guide each other, right? So with that, we're going to send you into breakout rooms and I'll be again popping in and out, just hearing some conversation. If anyone has lingering questions that you want to take a deeper dive into, there's a spot at the bottom of the Google document for that too. So please put those questions in and then we can send you to the appropriate resource member to have a deeper conversation with on. Sound good, everybody? Hello, welcome back, everybody. Okay, how are things this time? Let's get that facial expression. 1, 2, 3. All right. You had some awesome conversation. I bet you're wishing it could go a little bit longer. Remember that you can always connect with each other later and that we have the ideas that you're putting in, we're going to share it as a harvest so that we can keep that conversation going. I also forgot to mention in the questions that I had added in for around outreach strategies. For those of you who were on the call yesterday, Marty offered up a really great question that I popped in there. What are opportunities for this project to deepen justice, challenge inequity, inspire connection? So thanks to Marty for that. Okay, let's hear something that came out of your conversation that you are inspired by right now, or a new idea, or anything else that you'd like to share up.
I'll share that. I'll share that it was getting to know who our biggest naysayer is in our project. We are having trouble getting engagement and buy-in from the community, and we have a community liaison in place, but we are not getting that information back to figure out why people aren't coming. And so two ideas that sprang up was finding who's our biggest naysayer and finding out who the gatekeepers of the community are to really bring them on board to help bolster the project and give the residents voice. So that's really what came out of our meeting.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, how about one more thing, something that came out of your conversation? One tip, one tool, one outreach strategy?
Hey, I'll
Kellyanne,
share
oh.
what Greer, I was gonna just share what Greer shared out, which was really tapping university students. Her quote, I think, was, "We live or die by our universities," and they're just an incredible asset to be really thoughtful about how you might engage them, even if through a modest stipend. Acknowledging the time of yours being really valuable in matching sort of your skills and what you have to offer. I think she aptly also gave advice like don't you spend your time going to do sort of the text phone banking, figure out ways to really outsource folks who have some expertise in that space. And I think everybody, Jamie, wants to build a stand like you have so that they have
That's
a
gonna be
dual
mine.
camera setup.
You
Awesome.
took mine. That was it.
All
You want
right.
to elaborate, Greer, on that a little bit?
No, I was just gonna say, to build a stand so we could do the overhead and put our hands in there and it, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, make it happen. Jen, thanks for offering up that the advice that came out of your group too. I will ask, so I will actually lift the curtain a little bit and I'll very clunkily show you what the stand looks like so you can see how I have it set up. And in the meantime, I'll also ask for Gally to just get ready to queue up Mural for us. So I use an iPad. So I have a stand set up that I built so that it fits in place because I didn't want this to fall while I'm working. And then this is connected to a longer board that screws into a couple of metal stands that I had. So I just drilled some holes in there so it could fit and then screwed them in place. But so it's made to the measurements of my iPad that it kind of like fits in place. But if you've got some scrap lumber around, hey, you've got it. Okay, so how about let's flip over to Mural. So this is a different tool from Miro that we were using earlier, and I just wanted to show it to you because this can work really well if you're trying to do some more sorts of static boards that you're setting up with people. Miro is really nice to move people through a sequence. Mural can work like that too, but here's just a different taste of another tool. So as we get close to heading on out of here, I wanted to share with you back to that idea of the salad bar and sampling some tools in conversation today. Here are all of the things that we touched upon and more that came out of your discussion conversations in the breakout rooms. But you've had kind of the talk about outreach strategies and using tech and breaking barriers to broadband, while also doing kind of the meta of trying out some of these tools, different aesthetics, different ways of collaborating today. So as we get ready to close our time together, I wonder if we could go back to gallery view and let's just look at each other as we get close to ending our time. So I'm curious to bring your voices into the room and hear what is one thing that you want to try in your practice that you heard about today, whether it be from the workshop or from the breakout rooms, but just in a phrase or a breath, what is one thing that you want to try in your practice? And who would like to offer up something? Go ahead and unmute. Megan?
I am intrigued by what you just shared, the Mural platform. We're looking for a tool that's easy for folks to use that might not be as tech savvy, and found Miro to be a little complicated. So I'm gonna look into Mural.
Awesome. Great, Megan. Yeah, and please, everybody, feel free to add in the chat too. What are some things you want to try incorporating in your practice?
I know
Love
this
to
is
hear from another voice.
super simple, but I think we're going to try and build in the food component and possibly babysitting component into our workshop. Initially we thought that might not be a thing because of COVID, but if the community is hesitant to be involved because of those obstacles, then we'll do it.
Awesome. Yeah. How about one more? Let's see, Maggie. It looks like you're offering something, but you're on mute.
I was going to say, with food, just have it be packaged, little packages of little sandwiches and crackers rather than bringing in the box of pizza.
Yes. Yeah, right. Adapt to the situation that you need. Awesome. Karina, yeah.
Karina speaking. I'd like to more solidly identify our community's information hubs or our post office bulletin boards, especially with the young folks. I gotta get hip to that.
Yeah, what are kids these days doing? Yeah. Great.
I also
Okay.
really like the idea, what Jen was talking about the QR code as an
Yes.
invitation to a public meeting. I think that is that could work a lot because people may not have much money, but they seem to have phones.
Right. Right. Yeah. Work with what people have. Make it easy for them. Yeah. Love it. Yeah. So please feel free to add in any more in chat right now. I'll just say one more thing about this work that we did today. Remember, this was a huge variety. And when you're out doing things in community, you want to keep it simple. So I wouldn't recommend doing all of these things at once, like we just did in this meta workshop, right? Choose one thing, keep it simple, and your life will be a lot easier, and it'll be easier for your participants too. Just want to say thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Jen in a second. Thanks for this time together. Thanks for your ideas. Thanks for sharing into one big harvest so we can all benefit from it. And thanks for dreaming up some new worlds together today. Appreciate it. And Jen, I'll pass it to you.
Jamie, thank you